What happens when airport workers make the biggest mistake of their careers? When 11-year-old Amelia Williams was kicked out of the airport while traveling alone, the workers thought they were just following protocol. They had no idea who her father was, or the storm that was about to hit when he arrived. Sometimes the people who seem powerless have the most powerful connections, and sometimes those who judge others too quickly end up being judged themselves. This is a story about mistakes, consequences, and unexpected second chances. Amelia Williams clutched her small blue suitcase and took a deep breath. Today was a big day. For the first time ever, she was flying on an airplane all by herself. "You got this, Amelia?" "Bear," her dad said with a smile. He knelt down next to her in the busy airport drop-off area. "Remember what we talked about?" Amelia nodded and touched the plastic card hanging from the lanyard around her neck. "Keep my unaccompanied minor pass visible at all times." "That's right," Marcus Williams said, his eyes full of pride. "And what else?" "Keep my boarding pass and ID in the front pocket of my backpack. Don't talk to strangers unless they work at the airport. And call you if I need anything at all," Amelia recited. "Perfect." Marcus pulled her in for a hug. Amelia breathed in the familiar smell of his cologne. It made her feel safe. "I wish you could come with me to the gate," Amelia said, her voice small. Marcus sighed. "Me too, sweetheart. But I have that big meeting with the airport board today. I can't miss it." He checked his watch. "But Grandma and Grandpa will be waiting for you when you land in Atlanta. You're going to have so much fun." Amelia tried to feel excited, but butterflies danced in her stomach. She was 11 years old now. That was practically a grown-up. But the airport was so big, with so many people rushing around. "What if I get lost?" she whispered. "Then you find someone in a uniform and show them your boarding pass," Marcus said. "The airport staff are here to help you. That's their job." Amelia nodded again. Her dad always knew what to say to make her feel better. Marcus stood up and straightened his tie. "Now, your flight doesn't leave for 3 hours, but that's good. It gives you plenty of time to get through security and find your gate." He handed her a $20 bill. "This is for lunch. Get something healthy, okay? No candy." Amelia grinned and tucked the money into her pocket. "Maybe just a small candy?" Marcus laughed and shook his head. "Maybe a small one. After lunch." A car honked behind them. The drop-off area was getting crowded. "I have to go," Marcus said. "Text me when you get through security and when you're at your gate. And call me if anything goes wrong." "I will," Amelia promised. Her dad hugged her one more time, tight enough that Amelia could barely breathe. But she didn't mind. She hugged him back just as hard. "I love you, Amelia." "Bear," he said. "Love you too, Dad." And then he was gone. Walking back to his car, Amelia watched until he drove away. Then she turned to face the airport entrance. Her heart beat fast in her chest. She was on her own now. "I can do this," she whispered to herself. Inside, the airport was even busier than it looked from outside. People pulled suitcases behind them. They talked on phones. They stood in lines. They rushed to gates. Amelia followed the signs to security. The line wasn't too long. She got her boarding pass and ID ready, just like her dad taught her. When it was her turn, the security officer smiled at her. "Flying by yourself today?" "Yes," Amelia said, trying to sound confident. "I'm going to visit my grandparents in Atlanta." "Well, aren't you a big girl?" the officer said. She looked at Amelia's papers and the unaccompanied minor pass. "Everything looks good. Just put your backpack and suitcase on the belt and walk through the scanner when I tell you." Amelia did as she was told. On the other side, she put her shoes back on and texted her dad. "Made it through security." "Easy peasy," he texted back right away. "That's my girl. Proud of you." Amelia smiled at her phone. Then she checked her boarding pass for her gate number. B17. She followed more signs, walking past shops selling magazines, snacks, and souvenirs. She was tempted to spend her lunch money on a fuzzy airplane pillow, but she kept walking. When she found gate B17, she picked a seat near the big windows. She could see airplanes taking off and landing. It was amazing how something so big could fly in the sky. Amelia took out her favorite book from her backpack and started to read. But after a few minutes, her stomach growled. It was only 10:30, but she was hungry. The food court she passed earlier had smelled so good. She looked around. Her flight wouldn't board for another 2 hours. She had plenty of time to get lunch and come back. Amelia put her book away and stood up. She could do this. She was practically a grown-up after all. What could go wrong? With a confident smile, she headed toward the food court, unaware that this simple decision would change everything about her trip. The food court was crowded with travelers. Amelia stood in the middle, looking at all the choices. Pizza? Burgers? Tacos? Her dad had said to get something healthy, but everything smelled so good. She finally chose a sandwich shop with a short line. When it was her turn, she ordered a turkey sandwich with apple slices instead of chips. Her dad would be proud. "Flying somewhere fun today?" asked the woman making her sandwich. "Atlanta," Amelia said. "To see my grandparents. I'm flying by myself." The woman smiled. "First time flying alone?" Amelia nodded. "You'll do great," the woman said, handing Amelia her tray. "Enjoy your trip." Amelia found an empty table and ate her lunch slowly. She watched people hurry past with their suitcases. A family with twin babies sat nearby. The babies kept dropping their toys, and their mom looked tired. Amelia checked the time on her phone. She still had over an hour before her flight would start boarding, but she wanted to get back to her gate. Her book was getting really good, and she wanted to know what happened next. She threw away her trash and picked up her backpack. Now, which way had she come from? Amelia looked around. There were signs pointing to different gates, but she couldn't remember if her gate was in Terminal A or B. She pulled out her boarding pass to check. Gate B17, she read. Okay, so she needed to follow signs for Terminal B. She started walking, following the signs. But there were so many people, and she had to keep stepping aside to let groups pass. At one point, she had to take a different path because a janitor was mopping the floor. After walking for what felt like forever, Amelia arrived at a gate. She looked up at the sign. Gate C23. Her heart sank. This wasn't her gate. And this didn't even look like the same area she'd been in before. The seats were different, and there weren't big windows like at her gate. Amelia's confidence started to crumble. She looked around for more signs, but they all pointed to C gates. How had she ended up in Terminal C? Her phone buzzed with a text from her dad. Everything okay? Amelia bit her lip. She didn't want to worry him. Just finishing lunch, she texted. Back. Heading to my gate soon. She put her phone away and took a deep breath. She could figure this out. She just needed to find someone to help her. Near the gate desk stood a tall man in an airport uniform. His name tag said Trent. He was looking at a computer screen with a bored expression. Amelia walked up to him. "Excuse me," she said politely. "I think I'm lost. I need to get to gate B17. Trent barely looked at her. "B gates are that way," he said, waving his hand vaguely behind him. "Could you please tell me exactly how to get there?" Amelia asked. "I've never been in this airport before." This time, Trent looked at her with narrowed eyes. "Where are your parents?" "My dad dropped me off. I'm flying as an unaccompanied minor," Amelia explained, touching the lanyard around her neck. Trent frowned. "Let me see your boarding pass." Amelia reached into her backpack's front pocket, but her boarding pass wasn't there. She checked the other pockets, feeling panic rise in her chest. Had she left it at the food court? "I can't find it," she said, her voice shaking. "But I know I'm supposed to be at gate B-17. My flight to Atlanta leaves in an hour." "Uh-huh," Trent said, sounding like he didn't believe her. "And what's an unaccompanied minor doing wandering around the airport alone?" "I was just getting lunch," Amelia explained. "Then I got lost. Can you please help me?" Trent sighed and called over to another airport worker. "Valerie, come here a sec." A woman with short blonde hair walked over. "What's up?" "This kid says she's lost. Claims she's an unaccompanied minor but doesn't have a boarding pass," Trent said. Valerie looked Amelia up and down. "Where's your pass?" she asked, pointing to Amelia's lanyard. Amelia looked down. The plastic card was still there, but it had flipped around so the blank side was showing. She quickly turned it over to show her information. "See? I'm supposed to be on Flight 302 to Atlanta from Gate B-17, Amelia said. Valerie took the card and examined it. "This doesn't look right," she said. "This isn't the standard unaccompanied minor pass we use." "But it is," Amelia insisted. "The lady at the check-in desk gave it to me. Please, can you just help me find my gate?" Trent and Valerie exchanged a look. "I think we need to call security," Valerie said quietly to Trent. "Something doesn't add up here." Amelia's eyes widened. "Security? Why? I just need help finding my gate." "Stay right here," Trent said firmly. He picked up a phone and spoke quietly. Amelia felt tears forming in her eyes. Why weren't they helping her? What was happening? A few minutes later, a security officer arrived. His badge said, Keith. He listened as Trent and Valerie explained the situation, occasionally glancing at Amelia. "So, you have no boarding pass and a suspicious ID card?" Keith asked Amelia. "It's not suspicious. It's real," Amelia cried, the tears now rolling down her cheeks. "Please, just call the gate. They'll tell you I'm supposed to. Be on that flight." But none of the adults were listening anymore, and Amelia had a terrible feeling that things were about to get much worse. "Look," Keith said, crossing his arms, "we get kids trying to sneak into airports all the time. Usually they're trying to see celebrities or just causing trouble." "But I'm not," Amelia protested. "I'm supposed to be on a flight. My grandparents are waiting for me in Atlanta." Valerie shook her head. "Without a boarding pass, we can't verify that. For all we know, you snuck past security." "I didn't sneak past anything." Amelia felt her face getting hot. "I went through security with my dad's permission. The security officer checked my boarding pass and ID." "Then where is your boarding pass now?" Trent asked, raising an eyebrow. Amelia's mind raced. "I must have left it at the food court, or maybe it fell out of my backpack. We could go look for it." Keith shook his head. "We don't have time for that. This area is for ticketed passengers only." "But I am a ticketed passenger," Amelia said, her voice rising. Other travelers were starting to stare. "Lower your voice," Valerie warned. "You're causing a scene." Amelia took a deep breath, trying to stay calm like her dad had taught her. "Can you please just check the passenger list for Flight 302 to Atlanta? My name is Amelia Williams." Keith exchanged glances with the other two. "We don't have access to that information here. You need to go back to the main ticketing area and sort this out." "But that's before security," Amelia said. "How will I get back in?" "That's not our problem," Trent said with a shrug. "You shouldn't be here without a valid boarding pass. Come with us," Keith said, not unkindly but firmly. "We'll escort you to the exit." "The exit?" Amelia's voice squeaked. "But my flight, if you really have a flight, you can get a new boarding pass printed at the ticket counter," Valerie explained. "But you can't stay in the secure area without proof that you belong here." Amelia felt like she was in a bad dream. This couldn't be happening. "Can I at least call my dad? He can explain everything." "You can call whoever you want once we get you outside," Keith said. "Now come on, let's go." He started walking, clearly expecting Amelia to follow. With Trent and Valerie watching her closely, Amelia had no choice. They walked through the terminal, past shops and restaurants. Amelia spotted the sandwich place where she'd eaten lunch. Her boarding pass might be on that table still. But Keith was walking too fast for her to check. They reached a small side exit. A sign read, "Emergency exit only. Alarm will sound." But Keith pulled out a keycard and swiped it. The door opened without any alarm. "This way," he said. Holding the door open, Amelia stopped. "I don't think I should go out this way." "It's either this or we call the police," Trent said from behind her. "Your choice." Tears filled Amelia's eyes again. "Please don't make me leave. I'm telling the truth. I'm supposed to be on that flight." "Out," Keith said, his patience clearly running thin. With a sob, Amelia stepped through the door. They were in a small concrete area between the terminal and the parking garage. It had started to rain lightly. "The main entrance is that way," Valerie said, pointing. "Go to the ticket counter and explain your situation." Before Amelia could say anything else, they stepped back inside. The door closed with a final sounding click. Amelia stood alone in the drizzling rain. She couldn't believe what had just happened. How could those airport workers be so mean? How could they not believe her? Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone. She needed to call her dad. He would know what to do. She dialed his number, praying he wasn't in his meeting yet. He answered on the second ring. "Amelia? Everything okay?" At the sound of his voice, Amelia burst into tears. "Dad," she sobbed, "something terrible happened." "Amelia, Bear, what's wrong?" His voice was sharp, with concern. Between sobs, she explained everything. How she got lost after lunch, how she couldn't find her boarding pass, how the airport workers wouldn't help her and instead kicked her out of the airport. "They put me outside." "Dad!" she cried. "I don't know where I am exactly. It's raining, and I don't know what to do." There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then Marcus spoke, his voice calm, but with an edge Amelia had never heard before. "Listen to me carefully, Amelia. I want you to stay exactly where you are. Don't move. Don't go anywhere with anyone. I'm coming to get you right now." "But your meeting?" "Forget the meeting," Marcus said firmly. "You're more important. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Just stay where you are and keep your phone on." "Okay," Amelia whispered. "And Amelia," Marcus added, "this is not your fault, not one bit. Those people had no right to treat you that way." As Amelia hung up, she wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Her dad was coming. Everything would be okay. But she had no idea that her dad was about to show those airport workers exactly why they would regret their actions today. Marcus Williams ended his call with Amelia and immediately dialed another number. His hands shook with anger, as he waited for someone to answer. Airport Director's Office. This is Sandra speaking. This is Marcus Williams. I need to speak with Mrs. Chen immediately. It's an emergency. I'm sorry, Mr. Williams, but Mrs. Chen is in a meeting right now. The board is waiting for you, actually. Are you running late? Tell Mrs. Chen that my 11-year-old daughter was just forcibly removed from the airport by her staff and abandoned outside in the rain. Tell her I'm on my way there now, and I expect to see her when I arrive. Marcus's voice was deadly calm, but his grip on the steering wheel was so tight, his knuckles turned white. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'll get her right away, Sandra said quickly. While he waited, Marcus took the exit toward the airport. His mind raced with worry for Amelia and anger at how she was treated. This wasn't just about a mistake. This was about people in positions of authority making assumptions about his daughter, a young black girl traveling alone. Mrs. Chen came on the line. Mr. Williams? Sandra just told me what happened. I'm so sorry. Save the apologies, Marcus cut in. My daughter was discriminated against by your staff, Mrs. Chen. They refused to help her when she was lost, accused her of lying, and then physically removed her from the airport without verifying her flight information. She's 11 years old, and she's now standing alone outside your facility. This is completely unacceptable, Mrs. Chen said, sounding genuinely upset. Where is she now? I'll send someone to bring her inside immediately. No, Marcus said firmly. No more strangers approaching my daughter today. I'm 5 minutes away. I'll meet you at the south entrance. Of course, I'll be there waiting. Marcus ended the call and pressed the accelerator a little harder. He needed to get to Amelia. His phone rang again. It was from the number for the airport's board meeting. He didn't answer. Today was supposed to be important. The day his security consulting firm would finalize a new contract with the airport. A contract worth millions of dollars. His team had worked for months to prepare for this meeting. None of that mattered now. Marcus thought about all the talks he'd had with Amelia over the years, how to handle difficult situations, how to stay calm when people made unfair judgments, how to stand up for herself while staying safe. But he never imagined she would face this kind of treatment while simply trying to visit her grandparents. Marcus had served 12 years in the military before starting his security consulting business. He'd faced discrimination throughout his career, subtle comments, being passed over for promotions, security guards following him in stores even when he was in uniform. He'd learned to navigate these situations, to pick his battles. But this was different. This was his little girl. He pulled into the airport's drop-off lane and parked illegally, not caring if his car got towed. He jumped out and ran toward the south entrance, scanning the area for Amelia. He spotted her small figure huddled against the wall, trying to stay dry under a narrow overhang. Her shoulders were shaking. She was still crying. "Amelia!" he called out. She looked up, her face brightening instantly. "Dad!" She ran to him, and he scooped her up in a tight hug, not caring that she was wet from the rain. "I'm so sorry, Amelia. Bear," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." "It's not your fault," she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "They wouldn't listen to me, Dad. They wouldn't even check if I was telling the truth." Marcus set her down, but kept his arm around her shoulders. "I know, but we're going to fix this. Are you okay? Did anyone hurt you?" Amelia shook her head. "They just made me leave. I was so scared being out here alone." "Mr. Williams?" They both turned to see a woman in a gray suit approaching. She had short black hair and a concerned expression. "I'm Linda Chen, the Airport Operations Director. I can't begin to express how sorry I am about what happened to your daughter." Marcus nodded curtly. My daughter needs to get dry. Is there somewhere we can go inside? Of course. Please, follow me. As they walked, Mrs. Chen spoke quietly. I've already started reviewing the security footage. What happened today is completely against our policies. I promise you, we will get to the bottom of this. I don't want promises, Mrs. Chen. I want action. I want the people responsible for this to understand exactly what they did wrong today. They entered through a side door using Mrs. Chen's access card. Amelia stayed close to her father, her hand gripping his tightly. We'll go to my office, Mrs. Chen said. I've asked security to locate the staff members involved based on Amelia's description. Marcus looked down at his daughter. Amelia, do you think you could recognize the people who wouldn't help you? Amelia nodded. The man was tall with brown hair. His name tag said Trent. The woman had short blonde hair. Her name was Valerie, and the security officer was named Keith. He had a beard. Mrs. Chen made notes on her phone. Thank you, Amelia. That's very helpful. As they walked through the terminal, Marcus noticed people staring. Some recognized him. He'd worked with the airport for years. They looked confused to see him escorting a wet, upset child instead of heading to the important board meeting. Let them stare, Marcus thought. His priorities were clear. What those airport workers didn't know yet was that they hadn't just mistreated any child today. They had mistreated the daughter of the man who trained airport staff across the country on security protocols and customer service, including how to avoid exactly this type of biased treatment. And Marcus was about to make sure they never made that mistake again. Mrs. Chen's office was large and neat, with a view of the runways. She offered Amelia a blanket and a hot chocolate from her personal coffee machine. Thank you, Amelia said quietly, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. She still looked shaken. I've asked security to pull up the footage from the past 2 hours, Mrs. Chen said, turning to her computer. We should be able to see exactly what happened. Marcus sat next to Amelia, keeping a protective arm around her. Amelia, can you tell Mrs. Chen exactly what happened from the beginning? Amelia nodded and explained how she'd gone to get lunch, gotten lost, and ended up at the wrong gate. She described how Trent had been dismissive, how Valerie had questioned her ID, and how Keith had escorted her outside without properly checking her story. I told them I was supposed to be on Flight 302 to Atlanta, Amelia finished. But they wouldn't even check. Mrs. Chen typed something into her computer. Flight 302 to Atlanta is scheduled to depart in 45 minutes from Gate B-17. And look, she turned the screen so they could see. Here's the passenger list. She scrolled down to the W's. There it was. Williams, Amelia, unaccompanied minor. You were telling the truth, exactly as you said, Mrs. Chen confirmed, her expression grim. Of course she was, Marcus said. The question is, why didn't your staff believe her? Before Mrs. Chen could answer, there was a knock at the door. A security officer entered with a tablet. I've got the footage you requested, ma'am, he said, handing the tablet to Mrs. Chen. Thank you, Officer Davis. Mrs. Chen set up the tablet so they could all see. Let's start with the food court cameras. They watched as Amelia ate her lunch. Then the footage showed her walking toward Terminal B, but taking a wrong turn when a cleaning crew blocked her path. They followed her journey through the airport until she approached Trent at Gate C-23. There was no audio, but they could see the conversation unfold exactly as Amelia had described. Trent's dismissive body language, Valerie joining and looking suspiciously at Amelia's ID, Keith arriving and quickly deciding to remove Amelia from the terminal. There, Marcus said, pointing as the video showed Keith leading Amelia to a side exit. They took her out that door and left her there, a child, alone. Mrs. Chen's face had grown increasingly troubled as they watched. "This is completely unacceptable," she said. "They violated at least 6 different protocols for handling unaccompanied minors." She picked up her phone and pressed a button. "Sandra, have security locate Trent Miller, Valerie Brooks, and Keith Daniels immediately. Tell them to report to my office." Marcus stood up and paced the room, trying to calm himself. He needed to be collected when he faced these people. "Dad?" Amelia's small voice broke through his thoughts. "Am I going to miss my flight? Grandma and Grandpa are waiting." Marcus checked his watch. "Your flight leaves in 40 minutes. We'll figure something out, okay?" Mrs. Chen spoke up. "We can arrange for Amelia to take a later flight if needed, or I can have someone escort her directly to the gate right now if you prefer." Marcus considered this. Part of him didn't want to let Amelia out of his sight after what had happened. But he also didn't want to disappoint her grandparents, who were excited for her visit. "What do you want to do, Amelia?" he asked. "We can reschedule your flight for tomorrow if you'd prefer." Amelia thought for a moment. "I still want to go today," she said. "I was really looking forward to seeing Grandma and Grandpa." Marcus nodded. "Then we'll make sure you get on that flight. But first, I want to talk to the people who put you outside." "We'll find them," Mrs. Chen assured him. Her phone buzzed, and she answered it quickly. After a brief conversation, she hung up. "Security has located all 3 of them. They're bringing them to the conference room down the hall." "Good," Marcus said. He knelt in front of Amelia. "Are you okay with seeing these people again? You don't have to, if you don't want to." Amelia straightened her shoulders. "I want to go with you, Dad. They should know what they did was wrong." Marcus felt a surge of pride. His daughter was showing more courage than those 3 adults had. "Let's go then," he said, taking her hand. As they followed Mrs. Chen down the hallway, Marcus rehearsed what he wanted to say. This wasn't just about Amelia anymore. This was about making sure no child ever experienced this kind of treatment at this airport again. The 3 airport workers had no idea who was about to walk through that conference room door, and they certainly had no idea what was coming next. Mrs. Chen entered first, her expression stern. Marcus followed, holding Amelia's hand. When they stepped into the room, all 3 airport workers looked up in surprise. Trent, Valerie, and Keith sat on one side of a long table. They had been talking quietly among themselves, but fell silent when they saw Amelia. "You?" Trent said, his eyes widening. "What are you doing back here?" "She's here because she has every right to be," Marcus said, his voice controlled but firm, just as she had every right to be in the terminal earlier today. The 3 workers exchanged confused glances. Mrs. Chen took a seat at the head of the table. "Trent Miller, Valerie Brooks, Keith Daniels. This is Marcus Williams and his daughter." "Amelia." "Williams?" Keith repeated, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Yes," Mrs. Chen confirmed. "Marcus Williams of Williams Security Consulting, the firm that provides security training for our airport. And this," she gestured to Amelia, "is his daughter, who was supposed to be on Flight 302 to Atlanta as an unaccompanied minor." The color drained from Valerie's face. Trent shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Keith stared at the table. "Would any of you like to explain why you removed this child from the airport without verifying her flight information?" Mrs. Chen asked. Silence filled the room. Finally, Trent spoke up. "She didn't have a boarding pass," he said defensively, "and she seemed suspicious. We get people trying to sneak into the airport all the time." "Suspicious?" Marcus repeated, pulling out a chair for Amelia before sitting down himself. What exactly was suspicious about my 11-year-old daughter asking for help? Trent stammered. She couldn't prove she was supposed to be on a flight. Actually, she could, Mrs. Chen said. She placed a tablet on the table and turned it to face them. This is the security footage from your encounter. Amelia clearly showed you her unaccompanied minor identification. She told you her flight number and destination. Yet none of you bothered to verify this information. We were just following protocol, Keith said. If someone can't produce a boarding pass, protocol? Marcus interrupted. Let me tell you about protocol, Officer Daniels. I wrote the security protocols for this airport 3 years ago, and I can assure you that nowhere in those protocols does it say to remove a child from the secure area without first confirming their status. The security officer's face reddened. In fact, Marcus continued, the protocol for unaccompanied minors clearly states that if a child appears lost or distressed, staff should contact the gate agent for their flight or the main customer service desk. At no point should an unaccompanied minor be left unsupervised. Valerie looked close to tears. We didn't know. You didn't try to know, Marcus cut in. You saw my daughter, a young black girl, and you made assumptions. You decided she didn't belong here without doing the basic checks that your job requires. That's not fair, Trent protested weakly. This had nothing to do with her being black. Didn't it? Marcus asked, leaning forward. Would you have treated a different child the same way? Would you have been so quick to assume she was lying if she looked different? More uncomfortable shifting in seats. No one answered. Let me tell you what should have happened, Marcus said. When my daughter approached you for help, Trent, you should have taken her to the information desk or called the gate. It would have taken you less than a minute to verify she was booked. On Flight 302. Trent stared at the floor. Instead, Marcus continued, you called for backup, like she was some kind of threat. You, he looked at Valerie, questioned the validity of her ID without checking. And you, his gaze shifted to Keith, a security officer who is supposed to protect people, led my daughter to a side exit and left her there, alone, in the rain. Amelia spoke up for the first time since entering the room. I told you I was lost. I told you I was supposed to be on the flight to Atlanta. Why didn't you believe me? Her simple question hung in the air. The three adults across the table couldn't meet her eyes. I'm sorry, Valerie finally said, her voice barely audible. Sorry isn't good enough, Mrs. Chen said firmly. Your actions today violated our protocols and our values as an airport. More importantly, you put a child at risk. A small crowd had gathered outside the conference room. Through the glass walls, Marcus could see airport staff watching curiously. Word had spread quickly about what happened. What happens now? Keith asked nervously. All three of you are suspended, effective immediately, Mrs. Chen said. We will conduct a full investigation, review the security footage, and determine appropriate disciplinary actions. Marcus nodded. That's a start, but there's something else I want. What's that? Mrs. Chen asked. A commitment to change, Marcus said. This isn't just about punishing these three individuals. It's about making sure nothing like this happens to another child or any traveler at this airport again. Mrs. Chen nodded. I agree completely. What do you propose? Mandatory retraining for all customer-facing staff, Marcus said, with a focus on avoiding bias in security situations. He paused, then added, and I want to conduct that training personally. The three workers looked up in surprise. You want to train us? Trent asked. After what we did to your daughter? Yes, Marcus said simply, because clearly the training didn't stick the first time. Mrs. Chen nodded. I think that's an excellent idea. We were already planning to renew our contract with your firm. About that contract, Marcus said, I want a new clause added. Regular bias training for all airport staff, not just security personnel. And I want quarterly audits where we test how staff respond to different types of travelers. Consider. It done, Mrs. Chen agreed. Marcus checked his watch. Now, my daughter has a flight to catch, and I trust these three will make sure she gets to her gate safely and on time. Trent, Valerie, and Keith exchanged shocked glances. You still want us to help her? Keith asked incredulously. Not want, Marcus corrected. Expect. This is your chance to do your job correctly. To show my daughter that you've learned something today. Amelia looked up at her dad with a mixture of surprise and admiration. Is that okay with you, Amelia? Fair? Marcus asked softly. After a moment, Amelia nodded. Yes, I think that's fair. As the three chastened airport workers stood to escort Amelia to her gate, the gathered crowd outside began to disperse. But Marcus knew the story of what happened today would spread throughout the airport, and he was just getting started. As Trent, Valerie, and Keith escorted Amelia to her gate, Marcus stayed behind with Mrs. Chen to discuss the next steps. The three airport workers walked awkwardly with Amelia between them, none of them quite sure what to say. I'm sorry about your boarding pass, Valerie finally said. We could help you look for it. It's okay, Amelia replied. Mrs. Chen already printed me a new one. She held up the boarding pass. That's good, Keith mumbled. They walked in uncomfortable. Silence for another minute. Why didn't you believe me? Amelia asked suddenly. Was it because I'm black? The three adults exchanged panicked glances. No, of course not, Trent said quickly. Too quickly. Then why? Amelia pressed. I showed you my ID. I told you my flight number. Valerie sighed. It wasn't just one thing. You seemed, I don't know, out of place. Because I was lost, Amelia pointed out. Yes, but... Keith trailed off, unable to explain. Amelia nodded, as if their silence had confirmed something. My dad says sometimes people make decisions based on feelings they don't even realize they have. None of the adults knew how to respond to that. Back in the conference room, Marcus was laying out his vision for the new training program. I want scenario-based training, he explained to Mrs. Chen. Real situations where staff have to make quick decisions about who to help and how. Like what happened with Amelia, Mrs. Chen noted. Exactly. And I want to use real security footage, with permission, of course, to show how bias affects decision-making. As they talked, the door opened and a group of people in business suits entered. Marcus, there you are. A tall man in an expensive suit, approached. We've been waiting for you in the boardroom for over an hour. It was Richard Bennett, the chairman of the airport board. Behind him were several other board members. Richard, Marcus acknowledged. I apologize for missing the meeting. There was an emergency with my daughter. So we heard, said a woman in a navy suit. The whole airport is talking about it. Mrs. Chen quickly explained the situation. As she spoke, the board members' expressions changed from annoyed to concerned. This is exactly why we need Williams Security Consulting, Richard said when she finished. To prevent incidents like this. Incidents? Marcus repeated. My daughter was discriminated against and abandoned outside your airport. That's not an incident. That's a failure at every level. The room fell silent. You're right, Richard admitted, and we want to make it right. The contract renewal is yours, with whatever changes you recommend. Thank you, Marcus said, but this isn't about the contract anymore. It's about changing the culture here. The board members nodded, looking appropriately serious. "Do you know why I started my security consulting firm?" Marcus asked. When no one answered, he continued. "After 12 years in the military, I saw how security could be done right, with respect and thoroughness. But I also experienced firsthand how bias affects security decisions." He looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. "Was once detained at an airport while in uniform because someone thought I looked suspicious. I've been followed by security in stores. I've been pulled over for driving a nice car in the wrong neighborhood." The board members shifted uncomfortably. "I started this company because I believed security and respect could go hand in hand, that we could protect people without humiliating them, that we could train people to recognize their biases and make better decisions." He paused. "What happened to my daughter today proves we still have a long way to go." Richard cleared his throat. "What can we do?" "For starters," Marcus said, "I want to completely redesign your training program. Not just for new hires, for everyone. And I want regular testing, where actors of different races, ages, and backgrounds test how your staff responds." "That sounds expensive," one board member muttered. "Not as expensive as a discrimination lawsuit," another replied quietly. "It's not just about avoiding lawsuits," Marcus said firmly. "It's about doing what's right. It's about making sure every traveler who comes through this airport is treated with dignity and respect." The board members looked at each other, then nodded in agreement. "We'll approve whatever budget is needed," Richard promised. "Good," Marcus said, "because the training starts tomorrow." Just then, his phone buzzed with a text from Amelia. "Adam, Gate B-17, about to board." The three workers apologized again. "I think they really mean it." Marcus smiled and texted back, "Proud of you, Amelia. Bear. Have a safe flight. Call me when you land." He looked up at the group of powerful airport executives watching him. "My daughter just arrived at her gate," he announced. "Those 3 employees managed to do their job correctly this time." "Will you be pressing charges?" Richard asked nervously. Marcus considered this. "No," he said finally, "but I will be using what happened today as a case study in every airport training session I conduct from now on." The executives looked relieved, but also chastened. "Now, if you'll excuse me," Marcus said, standing up, "I'd like to go watch my daughter's plane take off safely. Then we can discuss how we're going to make sure nothing like this ever happens at this airport again." As Marcus walked out of the conference room, the executives exchanged glances. They had just witnessed something remarkable. A father who turned a painful experience into an opportunity for lasting change. And they knew the airport would never be the same. 1 month later, Marcus stood at the front of a large training room. Behind him, a screen showed a photograph of Amelia in her unaccompanied minor lanyard. "This is my daughter," he said to the room full of airport employees. 1 month ago, she came to this airport to fly to Atlanta. Instead, she was accused of lying, denied help, and abandoned outside in the rain. The room was silent. In the front row sat Trent, Valerie, and Keith. Their suspension had ended the week before, conditional on their participation in this training. "Today, we're going to talk about bias," Marcus continued. "Not just racial bias, but all the ways our brains make quick judgments about people based on how they look, talk, or behave." For the next 3 hours, Marcus led exercises and discussions. He showed video clips from security cameras around the airport, a Muslim family being subjected to extra screening, an elderly Asian woman struggling to communicate with an impatient gate agent, a group of teenagers being followed by security for no apparent reason. "These are all real incidents from this airport in the past year," Marcus explained. "In each case, Someone made a decision based on assumptions rather than facts. He clicked to a new slide that showed Amelia talking to Trent at gate C23. My key. Daughter told you she was lost. She showed you her ID. She told you her flight number. But you didn't believe her. Why? Trent shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Then, to everyone's surprise, he stood up. Because I didn't really look at her, he admitted. I saw a young black girl where I didn't expect her to be, and I assumed she didn't belong there. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Marcus nodded. Thank you for your honesty, Trent. Recognizing our biases is the first step to overcoming them. After the training session ended, most employees filed out of the room, but Trent, Valerie, and Keith stayed behind. Mr. Williams, Keith said, we wanted to give you something. He handed Marcus an envelope. Inside was a card signed by all three of them, along with dozens of other airport employees. We took up a collection, Valerie explained. It's a gift card for Amelia to buy books for her next trip, and we've all signed up to volunteer for the new Airport Buddies program. Airport Buddies? Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. It was our idea, Trent said proudly. Airport employees who volunteer to be specially trained to help kids traveling alone. Mrs. Chen approved it yesterday. Marcus was genuinely surprised. That's actually a great idea. It won't fix what we did wrong, Keith acknowledged. But maybe it will help make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. As Marcus drove home that evening, he called Amelia on the car's speakerphone. She had returned from her trip to Atlanta the week before. How did the training go, Dad? She asked. Eagerly. Really well, Marcus said. And guess what? The 3 people who gave you trouble have started a new program to help kids at the airport. Really? Amelia sounded impressed. So they learned something. They did. And it's all because of you, Amelia. Bear. You stood up for yourself, and now things are changing. But you're the one who made them change, Dad. Marcus smiled. We did it together. Sometimes it takes standing up to the wrong thing to make the right thing happen. When Marcus got home, he found a large envelope in the mail. It was from the airport. Inside was a formal letter offering Amelia a position as a junior consultant for the new Airport Buddies program. She would help train staff on how to better serve young travelers, and in return, she would receive flight vouchers for future trips. That night at dinner, Marcus watched as Amelia excitedly read the letter aloud to her mom. Can I do it, Dad? Please? She asked, eyes shining. Of course, Marcus said. I think you'd be perfect for it. Later, as he tucked Amelia into bed, she asked a question that had clearly been on her mind. Dad, are you still mad at those airport people? Marcus thought carefully before answering. No, I'm not. They made a mistake, a big one. But they've taken responsibility and are trying to make things better. That's all we can ask of people who make mistakes. Amelia nodded thoughtfully. I'm glad they didn't get fired. Now they can help other kids like me. Marcus smiled. His daughter's capacity for forgiveness amazed him. You know, he said, kissing her forehead, I think you might be a better teacher than me. As he turned off her light, Marcus realized that what had started as a terrible day had somehow transformed into something powerful and positive. Sometimes the best lessons came from the hardest experiences, and sometimes it took a child to teach the adults how to do better. That's the end of our story. Airport workers kicked out black girl, then wished they hadn't when her dad showed up. Where are you listening from today? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story about standing up for what's right and creating positive change, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content like this. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and family to help spread kindness and awareness. Each share helps remind others about the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.